This week on A Lively Experiment, Governor McKee's choice to lead the state prison system comes under intense fire from the Correctional Officers Union. And the release of the House budget signals the beginning of the home stretch to the final weeks of this year's General Assembly session.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazenwhite Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.
Joining us with the analysis, Harrison Tuggle, President of the Board of Directors for the Rhode Island Black Lives Matter Political Action Committee. Bill Bartholomew, political contributor and founder of the Bartholomewtown podcast, and Republican strategist Lisa Pelosi. Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Hummel. What a week it has been. We have a raft of local issues to get to a little later, but first up, a jury convicted Donald Trump late Thursday on all 34 felony counts in his criminal trial, making history again in a way Trump probably never envisioned when he became president 8 years ago. So I want to get initial reaction, then we'll get into the politics of it all, but just initial reaction.
I was stunned. I think as the end of the day happened, I didn't think the verdict was coming through, and then all of a sudden the emails started popping that they were coming, out with the verdict. For it to be unanimous on all 34 counts, I was just stunned. And I put aside Donald Trump. I put aside that he was Republican. This is a former United States president being convicted on felony charges. It was just, it just stunned me.
Bill?
Well, from a practical standpoint, we were on air and had learned that the jury was going to be sent home at 4:30, and then all of a sudden it was announced that a verdict was in, and from just the practical standpoint of being on the radio, it was stunning that we had to rapidly shift. I'm not sure I was stunned with the outcome. It seemed like it was trending in that direction, having covered this case as best as you can from Rhode Island every single day, and it is what it is, right?
Unprecedented. And I think nonetheless, whether, as Bill mentioned, the case around the facts in the trial, having a U.S. president be charged with a felony, one felony, never mind 34, is an eye-opening moment for our country. And the fact that this man could potentially be the next president of the United States should alarm a lot of folks. I will say that the fact that there are folks that have felonies in this country who cannot vote, but we have a president who can run for president and potentially be president with the felony. It's going to be interesting to see dialogues across the country, how that unfolds.
And then I was thinking, I always think, what comes next? So we know the sentencing is happening on July 11th. But 2 weeks before is the first debate between the President Biden and Donald Trump. So they'll be debating before he has his sentencing. He has the sentencing on July 11th. And then a week later, the GOP convention will probably vote him in to be our candidate for president.
July's not going to be quiet this year,
no,
right?
Not at all.
I've always thought, and it's unfortunate they did not allow cameras in the courtroom because that's the unfiltered lens. People can, reporters can do their best to try to capture it. I've also thought, having covered a lot of trials over the years, unless you're sitting in that courtroom, people can speculate, but I've never tried to guess what a jury's going to do because unless you listen to every single piece of testimony, the judge's instructions and all of that, it's hard. So I've been loath to second guess juries unless something comes out later, but I just thought the whole camera in the courtroom thing, that's another discussion for another day. This wasn't even a federal court. He could have easily allowed it in there, quiet, feed, let it go.
Absolutely. There should be a pool camera in every courtroom in this country at this point.
Including federal and Supreme.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. And I think we have to look at this case as a prime example of that in terms of just moving forward. How do we get to a point where there's true transparency in the judicial system? Right now, as you said, it's filtered through the lens or the interpretation of sort of runners almost, who are reporters who are serving as ambassadors from inside the court to outside of the court. That's a human filter that can translate the information in front of them somewhat differently than what the naked eye would see, as you said.
Harrison, what about the political ramifications? I mean, some people have said this, help him in fundraising. He might get a bump. Ultimately, is this going to weigh on some independent voters who, can't cross that line to vote for somebody who's been convicted of a crime.
You know, what's really interesting is the divide within our country and where most voters stand. It's becoming more increasingly obvious that younger voters that would usually vote for a Democratic candidate, such as President Joe Biden, are being, moved away from even participating in the election. This is something that we've talked about over the course of multiple months. And we're seeing a base that Trump has be, emboldened by this trial, which is pretty shocking to a lot of people. This idea that their candidate gets charged with the felony and is stronger for it. But unfortunately, that is the case. Doing a quick look on Twitter yesterday, we saw his campaign website crashed. And so I'm not sure if Trump is happy about this decision, but I certainly don't think that he's losing sleep about it, considering that this is driving right into the narrative that he said all trial, that it's a rigged election, that it's a rigged case in which the judge did his best to, silence him from making comments that would, change the outcome of the trial. But here we are in this country, a couple of months away from the election, and we have a president who has a felony and another president who is not really listening to a percentage of his base, which is, expected to vote for him this November.
Thoughts about going into the election season?
Yeah, Trump supporters are only going to be stronger behind him coming out of this trial. Biden supporters are only going to be stronger coming out of the trial. So it's that slice in between the people that maybe thought I could go with Trump because I'm not quite sure I'm comfortable with Biden, but now with these felony counts coming through as a convicted felon saying, gee, I'm not comfortable with him. I think it comes down to that bucket in the middle. Are they going to choose, or are they going to just choose not to come out and vote? And then come down to the core supporters, how many each one has.
Okay. To be continued. We do have, as I said, a raft of local issues. We'll get to the General Assembly in just a second. Bill, let's start with the corrections director choice. Still needs to be confirmed by the Senate. Wayne Salisbury Jr. has a little bit of baggage. Governor McKee's standing by him. But the union's really gone on. I hear ads on WPRO, and now they've hired a former Providence, Corrections has hired a former Providence police officer who's had a little bit of scrape up. What's going on over there?
It is an interesting moment. I think that it's a question of, is Governor McKee misreading the room in terms of his political ambitions going forward? Is this the type of thing that can jam him up? And I wonder if it's at that level, the political level, that ultimately any decisions would be made as far as pulling back Salisbury. Look, Salisbury comes from the Wyatt Detention Center. You will not find, in this region anyway, a corrections or facility otherwise that has had a more a lineage of horrific incidents and is just overall a problematic facility. You won't find it anywhere in this region. So that alone is maybe a disqualifier. Look, you have a situation where the corrections union, I think, is there a chance that this is political purely and that this is about folks McKee in 2026? I think there is a chance that there's an underlying
narrative. But it seems like there's more than that.
It would seem like there's
anyway.
more.
What do you think?
For sure.
Well, I think Governor Dan McKee's strength is, his biggest strength, is that he's loyal to the people that he selects and picks. And sometimes that creates a bit of a political problem for the governor. I will say that the concerns over the interim director is also from communities of color as well. When you look at the deaths at the ACI, the amount of outcry that has happened dating all the way back to 2022 and the pandemic particularly. And so from a perspective of an organizer and folks on the ground, I don't particularly believe that the community is happy about the direction that the corrections facility is going either. But the selection of the new director, whether it's national, whether it continues to be Wayne Salisbury, is a moment in which, regardless of who's picked, needs changes within the ACI, particularly around solitary confinement and the way that folks are receiving medical treatment when they have issues within the facility.
Yeah, the fact that we've had deaths in the facility, and as you say, solitary confinement, We need a progressive correction system in the state. We should be a model for the rest of the country. We're unique in that we don't have county jails. We're unique in that there's a compound with several facilities. We have an opportunity to do something new and potentially groundbreaking here, and more of the same and more of some of the highly negative results that we've seen is just something we shouldn't tolerate.
I'll also say that there are real concerns with the ACI, the building itself. It's an old building. It most likely needs to have it be rebuilt.
Well, it's a series of buildings. I mean, the new medium is probably now, it's 15 years old. That's the newest building. Supermax goes back to the 1800s.
You know, there's always been a tension between the union, the Brotherhood of Correctional Officers, the management, and the governor. I remember back working with Governor Ahman, and we were at Channel 10 for a debate in the gubernatorial race in 1998, and the correctional officers were out there lined up protesting because they were trying to get something in their contract. So the tension's always been there. I do believe the governor has the right to choose the individuals who he wants to have in his director's position, and we do have a process with the Senate, with the vice and consent. So let the process go through. I'm not seeing anything new about Wayne Salisbury that hasn't been out there for years. So he's been around a long time. He started as a correctional officer. So, he's gone up through the ranks to do that. Let the process happen.
Yeah, and let's see if the union and others interested get to the senators enough to be able to. But I agree with you. The governor should be able to pick his cabinet, short of something very, very egregious. So.
Absolutely. So let the process happen. Let both sides come out. I don't know if we've heard the other side. There have been people supporting what interim director Salisbury has been doing. So let's hear from both sides.
Okay, we are taping on a Friday morning. The budget is scheduled to come out tonight after our taping, and that usually is kind of the signal of the beginning to the home stretch of the General Assembly. They're talking about a mid-June adjournment. So we'll talk plenty next week about the details of that. Let's talk about some other things. Leah Bohr, Law Enforcement Officer, Bill of Rights, right in your wheelhouse. You've been following it. Where is it now?
Well, it's still in the Senate. We obviously saw the House of Representatives, despite multiple hours of debate on the floor regarding an amendment that would close the loophole for deadly force when it came to an officer who uses deadly force against departmental violation to have their Leah Bohr trial waived and that autonomy given to the police chief.
And just move on them.
Yep. But that was a specific carve-out. But there's still debate on the Senate. And as we talked before the show, this is where it started. The Senate, of course, with the Task Force Commission in 2020. And I believe that there's debates within the Senate as to what the House passed. And there were slight changes. Of course, we had an issue regarding APRA requests for, quote, minor offenses and how that would require, not by law, for police departments to release body camera footage. That's a problem. We know how important body camera footage has been, not only for the press, but for the public when it comes to transparency. The idea that we're moving forward with reforms that have more accountability, more transparency, yet this is an area that has been closed off was a bit confusing for legislators and advocates like myself, and so we hope that that's included. But at the end of the day, Leah Bohr for years has been a topic of discussion, punted last year, punted the year before. The question now becomes, are we going to actually change this bill for the better? And my hope is that we do with the correct reforms that are made given.
And you hope that it just doesn't get lost in the sauce, like you know what, we couldn't agree on this and this and this. They've come almost 90%, I think. And there's some still to talk about, but don't let that get lost. They were talking about passing it early in the session. Went right out the window.
That's right. And to Harrison's point, and actually to the point of cameras in the courtroom, body cameras and complete access to body camera footage for any violation, whether it's...
They tell the story, good or bad.
It doesn't make much sense to have any restrictions around that. I think that's a really critical component, especially in this day and age, that type of transparency, even if it is a minor infraction like a uniform violation. If Target 12 wants to pursue body camera footage of an officer that had an exposed tattoo, well, that's okay. Let Target 12 spend time on that. They're not going to spend time on that. We know that the body cam footage is for serious incidents, and that's what the public's interested in. But I think that's a major hang-up. You're right that last year it's almost amazing that it didn't go through last year, and let's hope the same doesn't happen again this year.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be the year because exactly what you said. They started talking about it early enough in session that they had plenty of time to work it out. So here we are down in the final weeks, final days of the session, and these details are coming up. And I was thinking about the body cam. We just saw what happened with the golfer, Scotty Scheffler. Imagine if that person...
And he had it turned off.
He had it turned off. So maybe we would have seen something more, either in his favor or not. So in this day and age, I fully agree with you that it should be, when you say something absolutely no release, full release, and then when you're trying to do the middle, trying to pick at the middle doesn't make sense. Do the full release.
One of the biggest, problems I think during the session on Leobor that was unanticipated was the amount of voices that had an opinion on this issue. And
all different opinions.
On all different opinions.
Right.
And, what I believe and what was said on the floor on the House debate was that there is a feeling that parties were not involved in these conversations. It is my opinion that the days of having the same 5 people in the room and not including all voices at the table, that we should be moving in the latter instead of what occurred during this process.
Yeah, the same 5 people minus the smoking. You can't smoke the cigars in the back rooms. There is also some rumblings about reforming the Coastal Resources Management Council, the CRMC, which has come under fire, Lisa, the last couple of years. So the proposal would be to bring it under, make it like a department, like DEM, DOT, whatever. That's one proposal.
Right.
It's kind of a quasi council. I think the main rub is that there are a lot of people on there who have no idea about the environment. They're not really trained in environmental issues.
Yeah, it made me kind of stop and think about why did we do these quasi-publics to begin with, And then I started looking at what other quasi-publics
There again, it's a Bay Commission.
RIPTA,
yeah.
Quonset Development, so there were a lot of different ones. I can see moving it into DEM. I don't see it being a separate department because you don't need that full structure to make it a cabinet position. So think about, everyone calls it the Department of Motor Vehicles. It's not. It's the Division of Motor Vehicles under the Department of Transportation. This could be a division under the Department of Environmental Management.
Yeah.
There's no question that we, in a time in which the climate is in peril, that we should have the best experts here. Of course, at our local universities, we have plenty of experts in the field. And so in order to put our state in the best direction, we'll need the people that actually are dealing with this issue and are experts in the field.
I completely agree with that. I also find it's at least worth considering making it something that's under the auspices of DEM. I'm somebody who thinks that the Bridge and Turnpike Authority should be rolled into DOT. I think consolidation makes a lot of sense for us in general. CRMC needs to be reformed completely. Just take a look at some of the shoreline access questions. And
the Champlin's decision years ago, which I followed, and then most recently with Quidnesset, they had a seawall that they said, let's change the regulations rather than, no, take the seawall down or do what you were supposed to do, right?
We just need to find a way to streamline shoreline issues in a way that we're not doing right now. It's as simple as that. Whether it's the fire district, CRMC, that one arena needs to be as simple as possible that matches with the legislation that's already been passed and that may be passed in the future.
Bill, what about Inspector General? It's it has no chance of passing, but it was interesting to me that the Inspector General in Massachusetts, the original state to have it 40 years ago, made the long trip down to Rhode Island to testify, and now it's gotten bipartisan support. It's always been considered a Republican bill. You have a lot of Democrats on board now.
I think the Washington Bridge is certainly a major factor in that. Look, my take is that the Inspector General should be something that comes out of a constitutional convention and that's an elected position. No offense, the chattering class appointing one of their own to be the inspector of their activity, I don't know that goes all the way. I think that if you take a look at some of the citizen watchdogs in this state, particularly the ones that drive people crazy in places like Warwick, crazy in a good way, that are dogged in their pursuit of open access and good governance, those are the types of people that ought to be the Inspector General, not somebody among the political class. You take a look at the folks who would be involved in the appointment, it's basically all of the inside.
The same five people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
Oh, the Inspector General.
Yeah.
I was thinking, would the day of reckoning have happened by now if we had an Inspector General? You know?
We might not have gotten to the point of the Washington Bridge if somebody drops a dime and says inspectors aren't doing their job, they should have been done all these years later.
And I know there's a cost associated with establishing the director or the Inspector General, but we could put legislation in that says it should be cost effective. Like if it doesn't cover bringing in the cost of it after 5 years, right, then we just do away with it. But why not try it?
Yeah, and the other thing is that if I look at all the departments they're adding, we're at almost a $14 billion budget right now. Look, it's like line item veto. Who wants their power eroded? And I think it's as simple as that. It's a hollow argument for the speaker to say, if he's watching, we have the Auditor General, he answers to the General Assembly, and the Attorney General can barely get done what they need to do every year. So you have somebody in that lane. But I agree with Bill. Who do you choose to do it?
I mean, it's an interesting discussion. I think legislators have a part to play in this, certainly, not only from the aspect of whether or not they choose to pass this piece of legislation, but also the question of capacity for many legislators. I mean, think about how much oversight is done compared to other states, compared to here in Rhode Island, because we have a part-time legislator. If we had full-time legislators that were able to actually take a look at what happened, do investigations with their own team, I think we would be in a very different spot.
Is there anything else you're looking at between now and the end of the session? Anything on your mind?
Well, we have certainly bills that are pending. We have payday lending, which is a conversation that has been over the course of multiple years. There's a housing budget that's incredibly important when it comes to production. I know the speaker has made that a top priority. And so I know there are advocates that would want more money in the budget towards housing outside of the bond, but we'll be keeping an eye on that over the next couple of days here as we see what money is allocated. As the speaker has mentioned that some cuts will be made over the next couple of days here.
Anything you're looking at?
I think funding for RIPTA. We've been talking about that for a number of months right now. So seeing are they coming forward with fully funding RIPTA, what it needs to do to have the routes that they need to service. So I'll be looking for that.
The May Revenue Estimating Conference, they do it twice a year, November and May. It's a lot more money, basically 50, 60, 70, 80 million more in the surplus, but it's a one-time fix. What are you going to do structurally about RIPTA? We talked about that last week. So what else are you looking at?
I was thinking the very same thing, RIPTA, and how to move forward with it, how to make a transit system that works for Rhode Island, that's practical for Rhode Island, that is, you want to call it a loss leader, you want to call it an investment, whatever the case is. You've got to find that funding, because right now most of RIPTA's funding comes from federal grants
and gas tax.
And gas tax.
And it's down, right?
And as we talk about housing and we talk about the importance of production, it's also important to realize that public transit goes along with that. And if we're looking to have multi-use properties that have real estate and retail properties, that it's important that people can get around using public transit. They go hand in hand, and without an investment in another, we're not going to be able to fix our crisis.
And we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, the new train stop in Central Falls. You think of everything that's going up around that just because people can hop on the train and go to wherever they live and businesses are popping up to. Let's go to outrages and or kudos. And some people I have an observation, I have a whatever you want to talk about. Bill, let's begin with you this week.
I'll do a rare kudo from me.
Oh my goodness. Stop
maybe,
the presses.
Maybe the first time ever here. I want to give a kudos to Attorney General Norona's office, particularly this week on it's last week's story. Rhode Island, one of 30 states to join the Department of Justice in signing on to an antitrust suit against Live Nation. Live Nation has a monopoly on the entertainment business.
Ask the Taylor Swift fans.
Ask the Taylor Swift fans. Ask anybody who attends concerts, and the amount of fees, the way that they operate their real estate piece, their Ticketmaster piece, all of that. But also on the back end, the way that they frankly abuse artists of all levels. It is a disgrace that Live Nation has operated the way it has for as long as it has. And I commend all of those attorneys general who have signed on to this antitrust.
And you did a podcast on this too.
Yes,
if you
that
wanna
actually
see it.
drops on Monday, a long-form audio story on ripodcast.com.
Okay, check that out. Lisa, what do you have this week?
So this is the time of year that you have to watch out for the shenanigans that can happen at the General Assembly. So for me, I have an outrage kudo. A couple weeks ago, Governor McKee came forward wanting to purchase the Citizens Bank building over in East Providence to turn it into state agency locations. So I'm thinking, trying to do this at the end of the session, right? It was wrong. Then to say I want to pay twice the amount of the assessed value of the building was wrong. So I was outraged on that, but I was very happy and give kudos to the House Speaker for putting the brakes on that so it's not moving forward this session.
I've thought of these things. It's like when Gina Raimondo first proposed the truck tolls. Remember, it was kind of like in late May of her first session, and it needed, that may be a proposal that we should look at, but not under, your best decisions are not made under the gun.
That's right. So especially, the building's been up for sale for 2 years, and all of a sudden it's like, ooh, we get some extra money from May revenue. Let's use it on, and let's give them twice the amount of money for it.
Yeah, it blew me away when I first moved to this market. They rent, and I understand the concept. You want to be in state-owned buildings so you don't have to pay rent. The Masonic Temple across the street from the State House, which was, we used to do at Channel 6, we do You Paid For It. It's on people living in there. What are you doing? Talk about prime property. So I said, how long's the building been empty? Oh, they stopped construction during the Depression.
Yeah.
And I went,
Yeah.
You mean in 1929, and we didn't do anything with that building for all those years. So
That's
the
right.
concept might be a good one, but let it breathe.
Right, and then I'm thinking, okay, and now you want to move state workers to East Providence? How many of them want to go over the bridge?
Over the bridge, right.
Like, hello.
What do you got?
Point of outrage, there was a bill that was passed in the House of Representatives this past week regarding a bill that is pertaining threats to public officials. It was backed by the two biggest teacher unions in the entire state. But what it did was it required increased penalties towards already existing penalties, which was a year. If you were to threaten a public official, a teacher, it was subjugated to a year. Right now, in the House of Representatives, they passed it to where it increases it to 5 years. And what we see here is it applies to children. It applies to kids in schools. And the language in the bill particularly pertains to whether a threat was perceived either directly or indirectly. And we know that
Who makes that decision?
the teachers or any public official who were to have been feel threatened. And we know the disparities within discipline when it comes to communities of color. And so our fear, and it was the fear of the ACLU and other 15 organizations coming from communities of color that signed on, was that this was increasing the school to prison pipeline. That this wasn't a case in which teachers who were threatened were not protected. There wasn't, a law that didn't punish those individuals that did so, that this increased it, and we're gonna see negative effects based on children of color primarily.
Quickly, do you think it has any chance of going through? Or do you think the opposition is enough that we're gonna put it on pause?
Well, we'll see in the Senate. It hasn't been scheduled for a committee yet, but this is yet another example of bills that are getting pushed through the General Assembly without legislators having any discussions about it.
Okay, folks, it is a quick 30 minutes. Come back next week. First of all, let's a bid adieu to Bill and Harrison and Lisa. Great to have you. Come back next week. We will know the full details of the House budget that's going to be released later tonight. You'll read about it over the weekend. We'll have the full analysis for you next week as a lively experiment continues. Have a great weekend.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by.
Hi, I'm John Hazen-White Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.